Good evening, everybody. I'm Rasmeet Kohli from the Investor Education Department of NISM, and I welcome all the participants and our speaker, Mr. Ravi Sairogi, to today's Investor Education webinar on Basics to Brilliance, your guide to smarter portfolio building. This webinar is being held as part of our Investor Education Initiative of NISM. To talk about NISM, as most of you may be aware, it is the capacity building initiative of SEBI. At NISM, that's the National Institute of Securities Markets, we primarily work in five broad areas. So we have long term and short term academic programs. We are into certification exams for market intermediaries. These exams are mandated for market intermediaries, and we also run few non mandated examinations. Third, we also have various e learning programs. Fourth, we have various training programs organized for working professionals and academia. And the fifth vertical that we work into is the Investor Education Initiative. Since I'm from the Investor Education Department, let me briefly share some of our key initiatives. So we work across five broad heads. The first head is investor education programs. Under this initiative, we have both classroom sessions as well as webinars such as these that is being conducted today. And we hold these webinars twice a week on various topics. These topics are on various securities market products, services, financial planning, and it's conducted in English, Hindi, as well as other regional languages. The second initiative that we have is our CSR based financial literacy program, for which currently we have a tie up with six organizations. These are Kotak Securities, Geojit Foundation, Vivriti Capital, Mirai Assets Foundation, Aditya Birla Foundation, and SBI Capital Markets. The initiative is meant to take financial literacy to a wider audience. And through these initiatives, we have reached 28 states, around 380 cities and towns, around 3,700 plus colleges, and have conducted 6,000 plus programs, also impacting around 4,50,000 individuals, more than 4,50,000 individuals. The third initiative that we have is the National Financial Literacy Quiz, which is popularly known as the NFLQ. It's a national level quiz for promoting financial literacy among the student fraternity, both the undergraduates as well as the postgraduates cohort. In addition to this, there is a masterclass series, which is a thought leadership initiative curated and steered by our NISM director, Mr. Sashi Krishnan. Our director interacts with senior market experts in these masterclass series, and these thought leaders and senior markets experts share their experience in the evolution of securities markets, what has been their experience, their investment philosophies, and different perspective in various securities market ecosystem, which extends from mutual funds to clearing corporations to MIIs, custodians, FPIs, etc. The recordings of these masterclasses are available on our NISM website under the Investor Education tab. In addition to this, from time to time, we hold other advocacy initiatives also, such as the recently held Real contest, as well as the Cyber Security Ideathon for the postgraduate as well as the UG students, the undergraduate students. So all these efforts you would see reflects NISM's strong commitment in spreading investor awareness and promoting financial inclusion. Now, coming to the context of today's session, the topic that we've chosen is Basics to Brilliance, your guide to smarter portfolio building. Indeed, a beautiful topic, quintessential for all the people here. And I would just say that, many investors put their money into different assets. Some of them put a bit in equity, some put it in debt, and others put it in gold. Now, after doing this exercise, everybody thinks that, oh, yes, it's enough to diversify. But the real question is, how do you bring all these together in a smart and a balanced way? And is there any way to achieve it? So that is where most people are struggling to find out, like, how do we balance it out? So building a portfolio isn't just about owning different investments. It's about giving your money a structure so that each part of your portfolio supports the other, whether it's equity, whether it's debt, it's gold, silver, any kind of assets, they should be able to support each other. And how can this be done? If you have a well planned portfolio, that will help you balance the risk. You can perhaps stay steady during markets ups and downs and stay focused on your long term goals. But unfortunately, many investors end up investing randomly or based on tips without a clear understanding. The good news is that it does not have to be so complicated. Few simple principles can be there in place, and that can help you make more far confident as well as informed decisions. And that's exactly what we are here for today. The Investor Education webinar by the NISM on Basics to Brilliance, your guide to smarter portfolio building, is curated to make portfolio construction easy to understand. This topic would be demystified by Mr. Ravi Sairogi, who's a co founder of Samasti Advisors and a SEBI registered investment advisor. Ravi has previously led fundraising and product design at Northern Arc Investments and has worked with IFL Capital, JP Morgan, and HSBC. Ravi holds a master's in economics from the Madras School of Economics and is also a CFA charter holder. With this, I hand over the session to Ravi. Ravi, please take it on from here. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Rashmeet, for that generous introduction. Thank you also for setting the context for this talk so well. And lastly, thanks to the NISM team for having me here. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining in. As Rashmeet highlighted, we'll see in this session how a few timeless ideas from modern finance, how they can completely change the way you think about investing. And what we'll do over the next 30 minutes is to take you on a journey from what most of us do, which is collecting investments in an ad hoc manner, to what professional portfolio construction really looks like. So you don't need to be a quant or a CFA to understand this. All you need is a little curiosity. So before we start, an important disclaimer: nothing in this webinar is investment advice. This is purely for your educational purposes. Now, most investors don't really have a system for building portfolios. What usually happens is over time, we end up collecting a few investments here and there, a couple of equity funds, some debt funds, maybe a bit of gold, and we just hope that it all works out in the future. But very few investors actually sit down and ask, how much equity, how much debt, how much gold should I really hold in my portfolio? And what is the mix that gives the best and optimal risk and return? The reality is that most portfolios are really built on instinct, not really insight. So the problem is not that we are not investing, it's that we are investing without a framework. So before I start in the main presentation, I had a quick question to check with the audience. How many mutual funds do you currently hold in your portfolio? I'll request if the NISM team can just put up this poll for people to respond to before I move ahead. Just doing a check if you are able to see the poll on your screens.
Should I launch first poll?
Yes, please. Sahil,
Yeah.
please launch the first poll. Yeah.
First question is live, sir.
Great. So I think you'll be able to see the poll on your screen. I'll just give you a quick 5 seconds if you could, just answer that. Okay, great. So I'll request if you can quickly just tap in your responses before I end the poll. Okay, so I'm just going to end the poll and I'm just going to share the results. So as we can see, about 27% of the people have more than 7 to 10 different mutual funds. 12% have lost count. 1 to 3 mutual funds, about 32%. Optimally, generally, the number of mutual funds that work really well is about 4 to 6. Close to 1/3 of the audience actually hits that mark. So great. So this is good to know, before we proceed. Now, in the 1950s, there was a young economist named Harry Markowitz who asked a deceptively simple question. In his as part of his thesis work, he asked a question that what if investors didn't just pick good investments, but good combination of investments? So just the addition of that word combination of investments, that single question, changed the way the world thought, about investing. Of course, it also fetched Harry Markowitz a Nobel Prize. Until then, people thought that the path to better returns was to find the next winning stock or mutual fund. And what Markowitz showed that it's not just about the individual investments that matters, but it's about how those investments work together in a portfolio. It's about how you combine those investments in a portfolio. So he actually introduced a radical idea that you could actually quantify how combining different assets can reduce risk without lowering returns. Yes, so it sounds like magic, but it's true. When you mix assets in the right proportions, you can actually earn a higher return for the same level of risk. And that's how his theories, which are called as the modern portfolio theory, was born. And that's nearly the foundation of all professional portfolio construction today. And it's actually a little sad that his theories have remained in the professional domain and not so much amongst the retail investors, but perhaps in time we will see his ideas being adopted more thoroughly by retail investors as well. So let's take a look a little deeper into what exactly did Markowitz discover. So we are using a fair bit of terminologies here that may sound intimidating, but please bear with me. Nothing here is rocket science, and you just need to get the intuition behind these ideas. So in simple terms, modern portfolio theory, as founded by Harry Markowitz, is the science of combining different assets in a portfolio so that you get the highest possible return for the amount of risk that you're willing to take. There are three core concepts to the modern portfolio theory. One is expected return. So for a portfolio, we need to estimate what is that an investor can hope to earn on average from that portfolio and from the different asset classes that make up that portfolio. Risk, which is a measure of volatility, and correlation. So how do the different investments or asset classes, how are they correlated with each other? Now, the beauty of the modern portfolio theory is that it shows that when you combine assets that don't move together, the overall portfolio becomes more stable. And that is even if the individual assets, are very, very volatile. So using this theory, you can build something which is called as an efficient frontier. Now, this may be a complicated word, but it's a very simple idea. It's simply a curve that shows all the best possible combination of assets that an investor can use. Now, every point on this efficient frontier is an optimal portfolio, meaning for a given level of risk, you can't get a better return through any other combination of assets. And we will take a look at how to build this efficient frontier, or what is the idea behind construction of this efficient, frontier. But before we do that, based on the previous slide, sure you're all awake. I have a small check. This is a question. Sahil, if you could please put up the next question. So this question is, which of the
Yeah.
following is not a core element of the modern portfolio theory. So we just got a window into what this theory is. I'm keen to see, whether you can identify which among these components is not a part of the modern portfolio theory. So I'll give you a quick 5 seconds to respond to this poll. Okay, so I'm just going to end the poll there. We have sufficient number of responses coming in, and I'm going to share the results. So the correct answer is market capitalization. So market capitalization is not a core element of the modern portfolio theory. In fact, most of you got it right. Close to 70%, of the respondents got that right. So that's great. Let's move ahead. So now that we have broadly understood what is the idea behind the modern portfolio theory, it's simply a theory which tells you how to combine different asset classes. Now let's see how it plays out in the real world using actual Indian data. So we look at three classes that most of us are familiar with and most of us invest in: equity, debt, and gold. So equity, the proxy is Sensex, which is a large cap index. It has an average annual return of 13% over the last 20 years. That's the sample that I have used, but a very high standard deviation of close to 20%. So it's a very volatile asset class, as we are aware. Debt, proxy by fixed deposit returns. The average is 8.5%. Of course, current debt returns are lower, but this is an average of the last 20 years. The standard deviation is negligible. Fixed deposits, as we know, are practically, as stable as anything can be. The risk is only 0.4% as measured by volatility. So this is really our anchor asset. And finally, gold, which is a crisis hedge. It doesn't always move in sync with equity. And historically, it's given about 12.5% return, close to equity returns, with about 13% volatility, close to equity returns, but with a much lower, volatility. So here's the question we'll now explore. Now, how do we combine these three asset classes, equity, debt, gold, into one optimal, portfolio? And before we can do that, I have another question. There's a reason why I've put up this question, because it explains an important concept. So I'll request, Team NISM to please put up the next poll. What do you think matters more in the long-term portfolio success? Is it picking the right funds, having the right asset mix, or third, timing the market? What contributes the most to a portfolio's long-term success? I'll just wait for another 5 minutes. 5 seconds. Okay, great. So we have 70% participation, and it's really, really heartening to see the results of this survey, because close to 90% of the people have chosen the right answer, which is having the right asset mix. In fact, there is a ton of research available online which demonstrates that what will determine the success of your portfolio is not necessarily whether you're choosing the right funds or not. Close to 80 to 90% of a portfolio's performance is dependent on its asset class, whether you have split your investments correctly among different asset classes. And the reason I put this question is because we are exactly going to try and answer that question. So let's look at how these three asset classes, equity, debt, and gold, have behaved over the past 20 years. Now, if you had invested 100 in each at the start of 2004, this is how your money would have grown. You can see that equity has been the long-term growth driver. It gives the highest return over time, but look at how choppy this line is. That's the volatility investors experience. The green line, the debt is much smoother. It doesn't shoot up, but it also doesn't crash. It provides stability and it acts as an anchor for your portfolio. The yellow line, gold, has its own rhythm. Notice how gold, it tends to spike during periods when equity is struggling. Like during the 2008 crisis, you can see how gold was holding up whereas equity was falling. You can also see this close to the taper tantrums of 2012 when equity markets saw a sharp correction but gold shot up. And you can also see this during the recent COVID crash where equity markets tanked and gold rallied. So this is really a key insight from this chart that these three assets, equity, debt, and gold, they don't move in the same direction all the time. That difference in movement or the lack of synchronization between these asset classes is what we call as low correlation. And it's the very reason that diversification works and correlation has a very important input into the modern portfolio theory. So we'll take a look at that. So let's look at the correlations more formally through this correlation matrix. This matrix tells you between the three asset classes, how are the two pairs of asset classes correlated with each other. So a correlation of +1 means that the two assets move together. Every time one goes up, the other goes up in an exact same manner. So in which case, if the correlation is +1, there is no real benefit to diversification. The risk just adds up in your portfolio. A correlation of 0 means that the assets move independently. One could be up, the other could be flat or down, whatever. It's completely independent. So that gives you some smoothing in your portfolio. And a correlation of -1 means that they move in opposite directions. And this is the dream scenario because one asset class returns exactly offsets the other asset class returns. So this is perfect diversification, what we sometimes call as a hedge. Now look at the numbers on this chart here. So equity and debt have a correlation of about minus, or you can see here, equity and debt correlation of about -0.08. So that's almost zero correlation. So equity and debt, the returns are more or less independent of each other. Equity and gold have a negative correlation of 0.16. So which means that when equities fall, gold often tends to rise. Not always, of course, but that's the general tendency. And debt and gold, of course, as you can see the number here, appears to be uncorrelated as well. So what does this data really tells us? It tells us that these three asset classes don't dance to the same tune. They have different rhythms. And when we combine them, their ups and downs, at least partially, cancel each other out. So I have another question for you. Team NISM, if you could just, put up this question. If two assets move in opposite direction, their correlation is +1, 0, -1. Okay, so I'm going to end the poll now. And I'm going to share the results. So the correct answer is -1. If the assets move in opposite direction, the correlation is negative. And it's great to know that close to 2/3 of the audience got this right. So we clearly have a very initiated, audience into investing. So that's, great to know. So we'll move ahead. Now we'll take a very simple example to see why correlation is so important. And the reason why this example is important is that most investors, when they are investing, they look at return. More seasoned investors, along with return, they will look at risk, they will look at volatility. But the really, really clever investors, they will not only look at the return, they will not only look at the risk in terms of volatility, but they will also look at correlations. And this example will tell you why correlations are so important. So we have two assets, asset A. Let's assume asset A gives a 10% expected return with 20% standard deviation or volatility risk. Asset B gives 8% return with a 12% volatility. The weight of both these assets is 50% in your portfolio. So you have split your money equally between these two assets. The portfolio expected return is simply an average of 10 and 8%, which is 9%. The important thing to note here is that when you're calculating the expected return of a portfolio, it is completely independent of correlation. So expected return of a portfolio is independent of correlation, but that's not the case with risk. When you're calculating your portfolio risk, correlations will play a very, very important part. So if asset A and asset B are perfectly correlated, if they have a correlation of +1, the standard deviation or the risk will simply be an average of 12% and 20%. So there is no real benefit of diversification. Of course, risk has come down, standard deviation has come down, but there is no real benefit of diversification because the correlation is +1. But as the correlation falls, and let's say asset A and asset B are independently, are independent. They are not correlated with each other at all. You can see how the standard deviation has come down or the risk has come down to 11.7%. And in case the assets, asset A and asset B are negatively correlated, you see a further compression in risk. I think this is a key insight from the modern portfolio theory that as correlations fall, your risk in the portfolio comes down. And please note that while constructing this illustration, I have held the expected return at constant at 9%. So this effectively means that you're earning the same expected return of 9%, but if you combine assets judiciously, you can compress the risk in your portfolio. Okay. Another question. When correlation between assets decrease, what happens to portfolio risk? And assuming the weights are constant, what would you see in your portfolio if you see that the correlation between the assets in your portfolio is decreasing? So Team NISM has put up the poll. I'll just wait for 5 seconds for your responses. Okay, so I'm going to end the poll now. We have close to 60% participation. Perfect. So again, 2/3 of the audience gets it right. If the correlation between assets decrease, you will see the risk on your portfolio also decrease. So it's great to see that most of us, got it right. Moving ahead. So now let's put everything we have learned into action. So all this while we were just getting an exposure to the building blocks to construct an efficient portfolio. And now we have that, and let's try and put that in action. So we'll take our 3 asset classes, equity, debt, gold, and we'll start combining them in every possible proportion. So on your left, you have a table where I've taken an example of some portfolio combinations of equity, debt, and gold. And for each of these combinations, we have calculated the expected return and the standard deviation of the portfolio. And standard deviation here is a measure of risk. Now on the left table, you can see these sample portfolios. Each row represents one portfolio with a different weight of equity, debt, and gold. So the first portfolio is 10% equity, 63% debt, and 27% gold. And we have taken these multiple combinations. And in fact, this is just a sample table where we have taken a few portfolios. But the idea is that you ask the computer to take every conceivable combination of equity, debt, gold, and calculate the expected return and the standard deviation. And this is what you get. So every single yellow dot on this graph is some combination of equity, debt, and gold. And for that combination, this graph tells you what is the risk and the expected return. So this is a fascinating graph because it really plots every conceivable combination of equity, debt, gold. And this is just a sample graph. In the next slide, I'll show you what the real graph looks like with Indian data. This is just to explain the concept. Now, as you can see in this cloud, that some portfolios are better than others. So for example, there are many portfolios which have a 10% risk. But across these different portfolios, there is one portfolio which for this given level of risk delivers the maximum return. So when you actually connect all of these best portfolios, you get a smooth upward sloping curve, this blue line, and this is what is called as the efficient frontier. Now, as an investor, you would want to be on this blue line, because if you're not on this blue line, it means you are invested in a portfolio where you can move to another portfolio with the same level of risk, but with better, returns. So as investors, you would want to be on this efficient, frontier. So the efficient frontier is nothing like a map of optimal portfolios. Portfolios below the curve are inefficient. You're taking more risk, and you're not getting the right return. And only portfolios on this blue line, are the best portfolios. In fact, if you we looked at this line horizontally, you can look at these portfolios vertically as well. So for a given level of return, there are multiple portfolios, and your job should be that for all the portfolios here, which are giving a 9% expected return, you need to select a portfolio which has the least volatility, which is again going to be on the blue, line. So now we have taken that same logic and applied it using actual Indian data, the last 20 years of data, across our three asset classes: equity, debt, and gold. Every single blue dot you see here represents one possible combination of these three assets. Each dot is a different portfolio with its own risk and return. Some portfolios are heavy on equity, some more on debt, and some portfolios more on gold. So together they form a cloud of these possible outcomes. This portfolio here, which is crossed, this is a 100% equity portfolio. This portfolio here, which is crossed here, is a 100% debt portfolio, and this portfolio is a 100% gold portfolio. But every other portfolio is a combination of debt, equity, and gold. Now, if you pick any portfolio below this curve, you're taking unnecessary risk. You could have earned the same return with lower volatility. So that's essentially the idea behind the construction of the efficient, frontier. Now, this chart is similar to the earlier chart, but in this chart, we are going to discuss a very important idea, which is we are going to compare the efficient frontier between equity and debt. And how does that frontier change when you add gold? It has a very important message. This chart. So this blue line shows you the efficient frontier when you are operating with only two asset classes, equity and debt. So if you are in equity and debt, you can be anywhere along these blue line. So this blue dot here is a portfolio of 30% equity, 70% debt, and that has a certain amount of risk and return. This blue dot here is 60% equity, 40% debt, and that again has a certain amount of risk and a certain amount of expected return. Now, let's notice what happens to the efficient frontier when you add gold. Now, you can see that the efficient frontier, it shifts upward. What that means is that for every given level of risk, the expected return is now higher. Or equivalently, for the same risk, the overall portfolio, for the same return, the overall portfolio risk, is lower. So this is the real magic of diversification. We keep hearing about it, but the modern portfolio theory actually quantifies it for you. You can see it right in front of your eyes. By adding an uncorrelated asset like gold, you make the portfolio more efficient without sacrificing returns. Now, this is not an example to say that you should invest in gold. This is simply an illustration. You can, for example, use any other asset class as an illustration. So for example, you have equity and debt. You can construct an efficient frontier using international investments, and then you can see how does the efficient frontier move if you add that asset class. If the efficient frontier goes up, it means that asset is probably negatively correlated with debt and equity. And hence, when you add that in your portfolio, you're able to earn a higher return for the same level of risk. You could construct an efficient frontier by using real estate, by using international equities, by gold, any asset class. So as long as you have the data, you can construct an efficient frontier between multiple asset classes and check how its addition will impact, your portfolio. Now, on the red line, so this red line is the efficient frontier when you're playing with three asset classes, equity, debt, and gold. And I have just highlighted one portfolio here, which is also 60% equity, but instead of 40% debt, it's in 40% gold. Of course, you can have multiple examples where you will have a mix between equity, debt, and gold. This is just a representative portfolio. And you can see in this portfolio, the expected return shoots up by close to about 150 to 200 basis points, but the standard deviation of the portfolio doesn't go up at all. So these are the kind of insights which modern portfolio theory can offer. Where you choose to be on this efficient frontier is completely your choice. These efficient frontier is like a menu of optimal portfolios which are available to you. And depending on your risk and return characteristics, you can arrive at a portfolio mix that really works for you. Okay, time for another question. Team NISM, if you could put up the next question. A portfolio that lies below the efficient frontier is considered efficient, inefficient, risk-free, or optimal. So if you have a portfolio which is below the efficient frontier, what does that portfolio is it efficient, inefficient, risk-free, or optimal? So we'll just wait for 5 seconds for you to fill out this poll. Okay, so we just crossed 60% participation. So I'll end the poll there. Yeah, and I'm going to just share the results with you. And as you can see, most of you again got it right. 2/3 of the audience, close to 70%, in fact, mentioned the correct answer that if a portfolio lies below the efficient frontier, it's an inefficient, portfolio. Now, we have talked a lot about diversification in theory. We'll talk about it in action. This chart shows what happened during the COVID market crash in 2020. This is one of the sharpest and most sudden drawdowns in recent memory of investors. The pink line shows a 100% equity portfolio, no diversification. So when markets crashed in March 2020, this fell by about 38%. Now think about that. For an investor with 10 lakhs in equity, saw the value fall to close to 6.2 lakhs. Now look at the yellow line. This is a diversified portfolio of 60% equity, 30% debt, 10% gold. During the same period, this portfolio fell only 23%, and it bounced back, much faster. In fact, by the end of the crash, closer to September 2020, the diversified portfolio was up 3%, while the all equity portfolio was still down more than 12%. So you'll often hear people say diversification is the only free lunch in investing. This slide shows why, and I think it's an important point, to highlight. The reason why I included this example here is that most people think that when you diversify, you're bringing down the expected return in the portfolio. That's not the case. If you are diversifying the wrong way, yes, you will bring down the expected return of the portfolio. But if you are diversifying the right way, you will not bring down the expected return of the portfolio. You will actually be able to hold on to that same expected return, but with a lower risk, or for a given level of risk, you'll be able to increase the portfolio return. I think this is the single biggest misconception that I have had in my that investors have when I'm in conversation with them. Most people perceive that if you diversify, you'll bring down returns, but that's only if you don't diversify the right way. So that takes us to the key takeaways before we open the floor for Q&A. There's a difference between diversification and diversification. Right? If you diversify the right way, you'll do well. Randomly spreading investments across asset classes is not diversification. Diversification has to have a method. Modern portfolio theory is one method, but there are other methods that you can explore. Modern portfolio theory, extremely elegant, of course, but like any theory, it has its own limitations. The expected returns, the risks, the correlations, they are not stable over time. They change. So the optimal portfolios also change, right? So it's a dynamic, optimization to be done. And also, it's very, very important to understand what is the sample that is being fed into the model, because the sample will determine whether you are getting a good output or not. It can be a garbage in, garbage out model. Diversification works best when underlying asset classes behave differently across market cycles, and the goal is to build a portfolio that mirrors your risk and return, and not simply own a portfolio by buying bits and pieces of different things. So I hope this was a good introduction for you towards modern portfolio theory, towards diversification, towards how to think about portfolio construction, just giving you a nice flavor of there is actually a science behind portfolio construction that we can use. Your questions, comments are welcome. I'll open the Q&A box and love to answer your questions. So Bharat Ram has a question. He says, these days, gold and equity have positive correlations. How to see these two asset classes these days? So I think it's very, very important that when you are computing the metrics that you will feed into the modern portfolio theory, you have to take a substantially large time period window, because otherwise there'll be too much of recency bias. Of course, recently gold and equity have had a positive correlation, but if you see historically, they have been negatively correlated. At least that's what history tells us. So I would at least recommend, we use 20 years of data, but even that may not be sufficient. The more you go back in history, the better. Of course, for an Indian market, young financial market like ours, data is always a challenge, how much you can go back in history. The US financial markets, for example, even has data going back all the way up to 100 years. So the estimates are more robust in a developed, financial market. But nevertheless, good tools for us to use and get exposure to. So how do we? So this is a very nice question by Nasir Hussain. How do we generate the efficient frontier ourselves? I think this is a very, very important question. You can do this in Excel yourself. In fact, the reason why I didn't get into that versus on this so much you can cover in a single topic. I also thought that generally, if you look online on YouTube and you Google, you will have several online templates where you can construct your own efficient frontier. I generally found that the theory of explaining modern portfolio, essentials was lacking, which is why this webinar focused more on the theory and the concept. But you can actually find very, very good templates. Zerodha Varsity, for example, has a good template. It has an Excel which you can download. You can key in your estimates of expected return for equity, that any other asset class, standard deviation, and you can construct the frontier, and you can also see what is an optimal mix that you should use based on the inputs that you have provided. So Nasir, I would really encourage you to just spend 5 minutes online and you will come across great templates. For people who are proficient in coding, you can use Python. There are Python libraries where you need to feed in the data and it can do the entire optimization, for you. For others, Excel works. The solver function in Excel can, do this. Yeah, so Kunal Bajaj has asked, is this efficient frontier only for Indian investors or for all global investors too? So the efficient frontier is for an investor. It is immaterial whether the investor is an Indian investor or a global investor. What is more important is what are the asset classes that we have used to construct that efficient frontier. So let's say there is an domestic investor in India who for some reason doesn't want to invest internationally, is only looking at investments within the geography, so they can build an efficient frontier using debt, equity, gold. Right, these are asset classes which you can invest domestically. Somebody may be interested in doing international diversification, right? So then you need to build an efficient frontier between Indian equity, maybe gold, and international equity. So the option, you can construct different efficient, frontiers based on the asset classes that you're looking to, invest in. So Nasir Hussain again asks the question, if I have the data, how can I construct this? Like I mentioned, there are several online tools. You will not find dearth of online tools which will help you do this. Once you know how this works, I think doing it yourself, you will not have to do it from first principles. There are ready-made tools, online. So what are the typical sources for gathering data on volatility correlations? I think monthly data is adequate. So for example, if you use 10 years of data, you will have 120 observations. I don't think 10 years is sufficient. If you use 20 years of data, you will have 240 monthly observations. That's a good starting point. Monthly data is perfect. You don't need daily. Monthly works well. And from those monthly returns, you can, of course, calculate the expected return during that time period. You can calculate the standard deviation, and you can calculate the correlations, as well. For Sensex, the data, is available at various sources. For debt, you can approximate the return using 1 to 3 year fixed deposit returns. RBI has this data free in its database on Indian economy on the RBI website. For gold, the World Gold Council, for example, has this data. You can use gold bees data, or you can use data NAV data of gold mutual funds. So for debt, for example, if you don't want to use fixed deposits, you can use a debt mutual fund, a representative debt mutual fund data For equity, I think you can even use a large cap fund, NAV. So even that works well. So Deepan Rajagopal has a comment. My entire funds are concentrated in equity. I think Deepan, if you explore the modern portfolio theory and if you introduce an asset class which is negatively correlated with equity, I think your portfolio will be in much better shape. You don't have to sacrifice returns for that. Like I mentioned, it's a misconception. You will be able to hold on to the return of your portfolio with a significantly lower drawdown and risk if you diversify, properly. So Darshan asks a question. Let's say I select 3 asset classes, 1 equity mutual fund, 1 debt, and 1 crypto. Is there any tool where I can find a correlation? I'm sure there are online tools, but I would like to mention, Mr. Sudarshan, that correlations can very easily be calculated yourself. So, there is a Corel function in Excel. You just need to have the series of debt return or let's say equity return, and you just need to take those 2 series, plug in the formula, and you will have the correlation between those 2 asset classes. So you can, of course, look at third-party sources which report the correlations between different asset classes, but you could very well calculate, this yourself as well. Yes, so there is a question from Vivek Yadav, who is a CFA level 3 candidate. His question is, when calculating the efficient frontier, we use historical return and risk. However, there's a saying that what performed well in the past won't necessarily perform better in the future. Considering this concept, can we allocate investments based on the efficient frontier? Would love to hear your thoughts on it. I think this is an excellent, question. The modern portfolio theory asks you for an input for expected return, risk, and correlations. Now, how you arrive at these estimates is up to you. You can look at forward-looking estimates. So, for example, many research is available in terms of what could potentially future equity returns, debt returns, gold returns look like. And you can, for example, use those estimates into the modern portfolio theory. The reason why typically we use historical data is because history serves as a good guide for the future. It's not a perfect guide, but it's a good guide. As long as that history is sufficiently vintaged. History is not 5 years of data. History is 30, 40 years of data. As long as we believe that that data captures swings, ups and downs, movements, performances, trends of different asset classes over different periods of time, it can serve as a good input. But that's a great question. History may not repeat itself. In fact, there are asset allocation models which are not based on historical returns, but which take as input your expected future return of those asset classes. And in which case, the models will still be able to tell you an optimal portfolio allocation based on your expectation of future, returns. The next question by Vivek, who is a CFA level 3 candidate, is that he had attempted to build an efficient frontier using Python, but he believes that we should also consider other asset classes. How can we obtain data for debt and alternative investments? So that's again a good question. For example, you may want to see how does real estate, when you add real estate in a portfolio, how does the efficient frontier shift? Unfortunately, for real estate, it's very difficult to get a representative index. So RBI, of course, has an index of residential properties in 4 to 5 major cities of India, but that's again not sufficiently vintaged. Plus, it's residential property. Many people invest in other kinds of real estate like land. REITs, they don't have sufficient data. It's a very new product, so it's difficult to introduce an asset class which doesn't have good data. But you can very well do it for debt. Alternative investments is again tricky. Alternative investments, you don't have standardized data at all. But I think you can introduce alternative international investments can very well be introduced. You have enough data on international investments, domestic equity, domestic debt, gold is not a challenge. I think we'll have to do with the asset classes for which we have data. And he mentions a Python library by Portfolio Opt. Of course, you can use that. That's a ready-made library which you can use for your portfolio optimization. It's great. You can certainly explore, using that. Next question, Mr. Pradeep. He, asks, how do we get the correlation data between various assets? We have answered that question. Okay, so from Mr. Bhupendra, he asks, instead of gold, we can add silver in our portfolio. Whether you can add silver or gold, that's completely up to you, and based on your research and based on the advice that you receive. But if the question is, can you see how the efficient frontier does when you add silver, that can very well be done. You can actually use historical silver data and then see how does the efficient frontier move when you look at silver as one of the products. Okay, I'm just scrolling through the questions just to make sure I pick up the most relevant yes, so there is a question. Understood diversification is good, but how much in equity, debt, and gold? That exactly is the question that tools like modern portfolio theory can answer. Mr. Indranil asks a question, which tool did you use to plot the MPT curve? So those are all done in Python. So I've used public data and I have used Python to build all of those efficient frontier. It's very simple to do that. We saw earlier, we had a comment as well that there are ready-made Python libraries which you can use to construct, these frontiers. So Amit Agrawal asks a question. I understand that Warren Buffett doesn't invest in gold and has mentioned negatively in his annual shareholder letter. Your view, I don't really have a view on that. To each his own. The idea is that you can look at these different asset classes, do your math, and see how they affect your portfolio returns and risk, and then take a call on whether you think it is justified to include that in your portfolio. Okay, so we have a question for Mr. Ashok. So for all-out equity portfolio or equity portion of a portfolio, how to decide expected returns for different combinations, how to get correlations and sufficient data. So I think I can broadly answer your question that you can apply modern portfolio theory even for building an all equity mutual fund portfolio. So let's say you have 10, 15 of your favorite mutual fund schemes. And now you want to know from that how to combine those into an efficient portfolio. So you can very well do that. Of course, 10 to 15 is too much, but let's say if you have 5 equity funds, one large cap, one mid cap, one small cap, one flexi cap, and you can select your favorites among those, mutual fund categories. And then you can actually run optimization to select how much you should allocate to large cap, mid cap, small cap, flexi cap. And the system will tell you based on the historical return, historical standard deviation and correlations between those funds as to how you should optimally combine it. So it's not necessary, that modern portfolio theory has to make use of multiple asset classes. Of course, that really works well because multiple asset classes with low correlation or negative correlation, the outputs are really good. But if you were to just use one particular asset class, you can actually run optimization within different constituents in that asset class as well. So we are close to 5 p.m. I think we managed to get, part of the questions. Many of the questions are asking for market-related views on how different asset classes will move, which we'll refrain from getting into. But I hope this session was helpful for you. Thank you so much. Look forward to meeting all of you for a subsequent webinar.
Yeah, thank you so much, sir. Would like to extend our heartfelt thanks for taking time and speaking at the webinar. Your insights, expertise, and presentation as well truly made a lasting impact on our audience, sir. Yeah, thank you again, sir, for your time and knowledge sharing with
Thank
us.
you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
And also thank you to participants as well for joining us today and coming in huge numbers. Your presence truly made the session meaningful and impactful. Yeah, thank you all for joining us today. Yeah, thank you.